Welcome back to You Told Revenge Files. Today, the story you're about to hear takes place in Manhattan, New York. My name is Elena Marchand. I'm 32, and I'm the forgotten daughter of a billionaire who just died, standing in a room full of people who believe I deserve nothing. It was raining the morning they tried to erase me. Not a gentle rain, a heavy, unforgiving downpour that hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 44th floor. Each drop hit the glass like a tiny fist, persistent, relentless, steady. The conference room smelled like expensive cologne and fresh paper. Mahogany panels lined the walls. A long glass table stretched across the room like a frozen river. Overhead, recessed lighting cast a warm golden glow, the kind designed to make wealthy people feel safe. Behind the head chair, mounted in a thick, gilded frame, was a portrait of my father, Richard Marchand. His expression was calm, his eyes sharp. He had been dead for 13 days. Heart failure. No warning. No goodbye. I sat at the end of the table, alone. No attorney beside me, no stack of folders, just my black coat folded over the back of my chair and a glass of water I hadn't touched. My hands rested flat on the table, still, controlled. Across from me sat my older brother, Julian, 40 years old, square jaw, charcoal suit that probably cost $5,000. He leaned back in his chair like the room was already his. His gold cufflinks caught the light every time he moved his wrist. Next to him was my younger sister, Marin, 28, blonde highlights, designer bag on the table beside her phone, which she hadn't put down once. She scrolled through it lazily like she was waiting for brunch, not a legal proceeding. At the head of the table sat my stepmother, Dominique. Black dress, diamond stud earrings, a single tissue folded neatly in her hand, untouched. She wore grief like a silk scarf, draped carefully for appearance. The family attorney, Gerald Worthing, sat near the portrait. He was a thin man with round glasses and a nervous habit of adjusting his tie. Two board members from Marchand Holdings filled the remaining chairs. They nodded politely when I arrived, but hadn't spoken to me since. Gerald opened a leather binder and cleared his throat. We are gathered to formally review the last will and testament of Richard Paul Marchand. The room went still. Even the rain seemed to pause. He read slowly, carefully, every clause measured and deliberate. The will divided the estate into 3 equal shares, one for Julian, one for Marin, one for me. Company voting rights split evenly, real estate holdings distributed proportionally, a trust established for Dominique with annual disbursements. Julian smiled. Marin glanced up from her phone and whispered, "Finally." Dominique pressed the tissue lightly to the corner of her dry eye. Gerald closed the binder and looked around the table. "Unless there are any questions, we can proceed with—" "There's a Swiss addendum," I said. My voice was calm, not loud, not emotional, just clear. The room turned toward me. Gerald blinked. "I'm sorry?" "A Swiss addendum, filed separately with a fiduciary office in Zurich. It supersedes this document." Julian leaned forward. His smile didn't disappear, it sharpened. "Elena, what are you talking about?" "I am the sole heir," I said. Silence. And then, laughter. Julian laughed first, a single confident burst of disbelief. "You really thought Dad trusted you with everything?" He shook his head slowly. "That's honestly sad." Marin let out a short giggle, still looking at her phone. "She's serious? Oh my God." Dominique didn't laugh. She tilted her head slightly and looked at me with a thin, pitying smile. "Sweetheart, I think you may have misunderstood some basic legal terms. That happens. It's nothing to be ashamed of." One of the board members shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The other looked down at the table. Gerald adjusted his glasses. "Elena, there was a reference to a Swiss banking document in your father's correspondence, but our team reviewed it. It appeared to be sentimental. A letter, perhaps, not legally binding." "It is legally binding," I said. Julian's smile vanished. He sat up straight. His voice dropped. "I'll challenge this in court. You know that, right? Whatever delusion you're holding on to, I will bury it. And you." The air in the room changed. The warmth from the lighting suddenly felt cold. I could hear the rain again, steady, patient, tapping against the glass like it was counting down. I looked at Julian, then at Marin, then at Dominique. None of them blinked. I stood up slowly, buttoned my coat, pushed my chair in, and then I said it. Then let's open the Zurich vault. The laughter stopped breathing. Julian's jaw tightened. Marin finally put her phone down. Dominique's tissue crumpled slightly in her fist. Gerald opened his mouth, but no words came out. I turned toward the door. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor. Before I left, I glanced at my father's portrait one last time. His painted eyes stared past all of them, past the suits, past the lies, past the laughter. And for the first time in years, I felt like he was looking directly at me. Before I tell you what was inside that vault, take a second. Have you ever been the only person in a room who knew the truth, and no one believed you? Sometimes humiliation isn't loud. Sometimes it's polite smiles and quiet disrespect. Sometimes it's laughter disguised as concern. But silence was my strength, and I had been silent long enough. I was 7 years old when my mother died. Cancer. The slow kind. The kind that lets you watch someone disappear piece by piece while the rest of the world keeps moving. I remember the hospital room, the hum of machines, the smell of antiseptic and wilting flowers on the windowsill. I remember holding her hand and feeling how thin her fingers had become. She looked at me and whispered, "You're going to be strong, Elena, stronger than anyone expects." I didn't understand what she meant then. I do now. After she passed, my father buried himself in work. Marchand Holdings was already a giant. Global investments, real estate, private equity. But after my mother's death, it became his entire world. He worked 16-hour days. He traveled constantly. And slowly, without either of us noticing, a distance grew between us. Then Dominique arrived. She was elegant, poised. She knew exactly how to fill the silence my mother left behind. Within 2 years, she and my father were married. Within 4, Julian and Marin had become the center of the household. I became the extra. Julian was the golden son, tall, charming, loud. My father brought him to board meetings at 16. He was introduced at galas as the future of Marchand Holdings. He shook hands with investors before he could even drive a car. Marin was the darling, pretty, social, effortlessly likable. She hosted charity brunches with Dominique. She appeared in magazine profiles about the next generation of wealth. She never worked a day in her life, but was treated like royalty. And me? I was the serious one, the difficult one, the one who asked too many questions. At family dinners, I sat at the far end of the table. At company events, I was introduced last, if at all. Dominique would smile politely and say, "Oh, and this is Elena, Richard's daughter from before." From before. Like I was a chapter that had already ended. But I noticed things. I always notice things. When I was 15, I found discrepancies in a quarterly report my father left on his desk. Small numbers that didn't add up. I circled them in red pen and left the paper on his chair. He never mentioned it, but the next quarter, the numbers were corrected. When I was 17, they asked me to review offshore account summaries, not officially, not with a title or compensation, just casually. "Elena, you're good with numbers. Take a look at this." I did. For free. Every time. When I asked about a particular account routed through a Swiss holding company, Julian told me to stop being paranoid. Dominique said I was overthinking things. Marin didn't even look up from her phone. I was asked to sign minor documents under the guise of family unity, transfer authorizations, board consent forms, things I didn't fully understand at the time but signed because they told me it was my duty. They used my trust. They used my silence. They used my loyalty. And they called it love. But there was one moment that changed everything. I was 18. It was late. The house was dark except for the light under my father's study door. I walked past it on my way to bed and heard his voice through the crack. He was on the phone, speaking quietly. "She sees things other people don't," he said. "That's both her gift and her burden." He was talking about me. I stood there for a long time, my hand on the wall, my heart beating in my throat. I didn't knock. I didn't interrupt. I just listened to the silence after he hung up. That sentence became my scar and my fuel. I left home at 19. I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I simply packed a bag and enrolled in a university program for accounting and finance. No one tried to stop me. Over the next 13 years, I built myself from the ground up. I earned my CPA. then my forensic accounting certification, then a specialization in international inheritance structures and offshore compliance. I became the person families hired when someone was hiding money, when trusts were manipulated, when estates were looted from the inside. I was good at it, very good, because I had lived it. While Julian gave interviews about vision and legacy, I was tracing shell companies across 4 continents. While Marin posted photos from yacht parties, I was reading Swiss banking regulations until 2 in the morning. No one in my family knew what I really did. They assumed I was a mid-level accountant somewhere. They never asked. I never corrected them. Silence was my strength. But I wasn't just building a career. I was building a case. Over the years, I had quietly maintained a relationship with my father's Swiss fiduciary, a man named Anton Kessler. He managed a private vault structure my father had established years earlier, a structure no one else in the family knew about. My father and I didn't speak often, but when we did, it was always about numbers, about structures, about protection. 6 months before he died, he sent me an email. 3 words, Vault Directive 7. I knew exactly what it meant. I had copies of correspondence between my father and Anton. I had records of a secondary testament filed under Swiss law. I had timestamps showing restricted shares transferred into a Zurich holding company 48 hours before my father's death. I didn't argue. I documented. This wasn't revenge, it was accounting. After I walked out of that conference room, the rain didn't stop. It followed me down 44 floors, through the marble lobby, and onto the wet Manhattan sidewalk. I stood under a black umbrella and breathed. The air was cold, late October cold, the kind that sits in your lungs and reminds you that you're alive. My phone buzzed before I reached the corner. It was a text from Julian. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." I read it once. Then I put my phone away. Within 72 hours, the campaign began. Julian filed an emergency motion with the probate court. The claim was simple and vicious, that I was attempting to manipulate estate proceedings through fraudulent documents. He requested an immediate injunction to block any investigation into the Swiss addendum. His lawyers described me as emotionally unstable and financially desperate. Neither was true. But truth wasn't the point. Control was. 2 days later, a story appeared on a well-known business blog. The headline read, "Estranged Marchand daughter attempts power grab after father's death." The article quoted unnamed sources close to the family, who described me as bitter, disconnected, and delusional. I read every word. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I didn't respond. Anger wasn't loud, it was controlled. The pressure increased daily. My temporary access to estate accounts was frozen. Board members who had once nodded politely in my direction now refused my calls. A second article appeared, this time with a photo of me leaving the law firm. The caption read, "Sources say grief has clouded her judgment." Dominique gave a tearful interview to a lifestyle magazine. She spoke about protecting Richard's legacy and how some family members struggle with loss in unhealthy ways. She never mentioned my name. She didn't have to. Marin posted a photo on social media, a black and white image of our father's study with the caption, "Protecting what matters." It got 40,000 likes. Julian called a private board meeting. I wasn't invited. He proposed a vote to formally exclude me from any estate decisions pending the court ruling. The motion passed 5-2. They were building a wall around everything, brick by brick, story by story, vote by vote. And I let them. Because while they were busy performing for cameras and courtrooms, I was doing something else entirely. I was waiting for them to make the one mistake I knew they would make. Here's what they didn't know. My father had created a dual-layered estate structure. The domestic will, the one Gerald read in the conference room, was real, but it was secondary, a placeholder. It applied only if no international filings existed. But an international filing did exist. A notarized amendment registered with the Zurich Cantonal Authority named me, Elena Marchand, as the sole controlling beneficiary of the Marchand Family Trust, Zurich Division. Under Swiss law, this document held superior authority over any conflicting domestic instrument, as long as the assets in question were held within Swiss jurisdiction. And they were, all of them. 82% of the family's total wealth had been quietly moved into Swiss holding structures over the past decade. My father had done this deliberately, carefully. with Anton Kessler's guidance and my knowledge. There was more. Inside the vault, referenced in my father's correspondence as Vault Directive 7, were three critical items. First, the original beneficiary certificate, signed, sealed, notarized. Second, a corporate control document transferring 82% of voting power in Marchand Holdings to me. Third, a personal letter from my father, handwritten, 2 pages. I had never read the letter. Anton told me it existed. My father told me it would explain everything, but I was instructed not to open the vault until it was necessary. Now it was necessary. But the most important piece of the puzzle wasn't something I did. It was something Julian did. 3 weeks before the will reading, Julian had attempted to liquidate a block of restricted shares held in one of the Swiss subsidiaries. He didn't have authorization. He didn't understand the structure. He simply assumed that as the eldest son, he had the right. He didn't. Those shares were locked under a fiduciary compliance clause. Any unauthorized sale attempt triggered an automatic review by the Swiss Financial Authority. That review activated a disclosure requirement, which meant the Zurich vault's contents would be formally entered into the legal record. Julian didn't just fail to steal the shares. He unlocked the trap. He activated the very clause that would hand me everything. This wasn't revenge, it was accounting. I contacted Anton Kessler. I contacted my attorney in Zurich. I filed the necessary disclosures, and I booked a flight. When my brother received the notification that a formal Swiss compliance hearing had been scheduled, he panicked. He called Gerald. Gerald called Dominique. Dominique called Marin, and all 4 of them booked flights to Zurich. They thought they were going to settle it. They had no idea what was waiting for them. The banking office sat on a quiet street overlooking the Limmat River. Old stone walls, tall arched windows. Inside, the floors were pale marble. The air smelled like cold stone and polished wood. Everything was precise, clean, silent. The temperature was cool, not uncomfortable, just deliberate. The kind of environment designed for clarity. I arrived early, 7:45 in the morning. The sky over Zurich was gray but calm. No rain, just stillness. My attorney, Isabelle Frey, met me in the lobby. She was Swiss-German, sharp, composed. We had worked together for 3 years. She carried a single leather folder and a look that said she was ready. Anton Kessler was already inside. He stood near the frosted glass partition that separated the main office from the vault corridor. He was in his 60s, silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses. He shook my hand and held it for a moment longer than usual. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't feel it, because I felt it too much. By 8:30, everyone had arrived. Julian walked in first. His suit was wrinkled from the flight. His jaw was tight. He scanned the room like he was assessing a threat. Behind him came Marin. No phone this time. Her eyes were wide and uncertain. She looked younger without her confidence. They were accompanied by a neutral estate observer, a court-appointed attorney from New York who had been assigned to witness the proceedings. Gerald Worthing was absent. He had declined to travel. I suspected he already knew what was coming. Dominique did not come. She sent no representative. That silence said everything. We sat in a private room with a long oak table. The frosted glass wall behind us led to the vault corridor. Through it, I could see the outline of a heavy steel door. The Swiss compliance officer, a woman named Dr. Lena Brandt, opened the proceedings. "This hearing has been triggered by an unauthorized liquidation attempt involving restricted shares held under the Marchand Family Trust, Zurich Division," she said. Under Article 12C of Swiss fiduciary compliance law, any unauthorized transaction activates a mandatory disclosure of all vault-held instruments. Julian shifted in his chair. "This is procedural. We're here to resolve a misunderstanding." Dr. Brandt looked at him calmly. "This is not a negotiation, Mr. Marchand. This is a disclosure." She nodded to Anton. Anton stood and walked to the frosted glass partition. He pressed his hand to a biometric scanner. The glass slid open. Behind it was the vault corridor, narrow, dimly lit, lined with steel. We followed him in silence. The vault door was massive, brushed steel, 2 combination locks, 1 biometric panel. Anton entered his codes. Then he turned to me. "Miss Marchand, your authorization, please." I stepped forward. I pressed my thumb to the scanner. A green light pulsed once. The door opened with a deep, heavy sound, like the earth exhaling. Inside was a small room, temperature-controlled, one steel drawer built into the far wall. Anton pulled the drawer open slowly. Inside were 3 items. The first was a certificate, thick, cream-colored paper, embossed seal, notarized stamps from the Zurich Cantonal Authority. It read, "Sole controlling beneficiary, Elena Marchand." The second was a corporate control document, detailed, technical, but its meaning was simple. 82% of all voting power in Marchand Holdings was transferred to me. Not shared, not divided, transferred. The third was a letter, handwritten, my father's handwriting, 2 pages, folded once. I didn't open it, not yet, not in front of them. Anton carried the documents to the table. Dr. Brandt reviewed each one. She compared them against the registered filings. She cross-referenced the notarization dates and the compliance records. Then she looked up. Under Swiss fiduciary law, these instruments are valid and enforceable. Control of the Marchand Family Trust, Zurich Division, rests with one beneficiary. She paused. Elena Marchand. The room was silent. Julian stared at the certificate. His lips parted, but no words came out. His hands gripped the edge of the table. The confidence he had carried into the Manhattan conference room, the smirk, the laughter, the threats, all of it drained from his face like water from a cracked glass. Maren looked at me. For the first time in our lives, she actually looked at me. Not past me, not through me, at me. Her eyes were glassy. Her mouth trembled slightly. The estate observer made notes in silence. Isabel placed a second folder on the table. "There's more," she said. She explained it clearly, simply, so that everyone understood. Julian's attempt to sell the restricted shares didn't just trigger this hearing. It violated the fiduciary compliance clause built into the trust structure. That violation automatically voided the minority protections that Julian and Maren held under the domestic will. In plain terms, by trying to grab what wasn't his, Julian destroyed the legal safety net that protected what little he did have. Their shares were now subject to clawback. Their board positions were void. An emergency shareholder provision had already been activated, transferring all operational authority to the controlling beneficiary. Me. Julian finally spoke. His voice was hoarse. "This can't be legal." Dr. Brandt didn't blink. "It is. Dad wouldn't do this," he whispered. I reached for the handwritten letter. I unfolded it slowly. My father's handwriting was small and precise. I read it in silence while the room waited. The letter was not long, but one line near the end made my throat tighten. To the only one who understood numbers without needing applause. I folded the letter and placed it back in the drawer. Then I looked at Julian. "I told you," I said quietly. He didn't respond. He couldn't. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I didn't raise my voice. Silence was my strength. It always had been. The weeks that followed were precise, methodical, like closing a ledger. A regulatory investigation was opened into Julian's unauthorized asset movement. His accounts were temporarily frozen pending review. The board of Marchand Holdings voted unanimously to remove him as acting executive. He didn't contest it. Maren's trust distributions were suspended. Her involvement in company affairs, minimal as it was formally terminated. A public correction was issued to every media outlet that had published stories about me. The business blog that called me desperate printed a retraction. The lifestyle magazine that featured Dominique's tearful interview quietly deleted it from their website. Dominique herself faced a separate audit. Her charitable foundation, funded with Marchand Holdings money, was investigated for misappropriation of funds. The findings were not kind. Their reputations didn't collapse with a bang. They collapsed with silence. The same silence they had used against me for years. This wasn't revenge. It was accounting. I restructured Marchand Holdings from the inside out. Full transparency. Independent audits. Ethical investment standards. No more shadow subsidiaries. No more hidden accounts. No more family loyalty as a substitute for competence. I hired based on merit. I promoted based on results. I built systems that didn't depend on trust, because I had learned the hard way that trust without verification is just hope wearing a suit. I established a financial literacy foundation for young women from overlooked backgrounds. Women who were told they were too serious, too analytical, too cold. Women who were handed documents to sign and told not to ask questions. I named it after my mother, the Elena Marchand Foundation. I created a scholarship in her name for students pursuing forensic accounting and compliance. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can give someone isn't money. It's the ability to read where the money went. I moved part of the firm's operations to Zurich. Not for revenge, for control, for stability, for a reminder that the quietest room in the building held the most important truth. The rain in Manhattan eventually stopped. The skyline looked different from my new office. Not because the buildings had changed, because I had. I read my father's letter one more time, alone, in the quiet of a Sunday morning, coffee in my hand, sunlight on the page. "You see things other people don't," he had written. "That's both your gift and your burden." I'm sorry I didn't say it louder, but I said it where it mattered, in the numbers. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer. Then I closed it. They laughed because I was quiet. They mistook silence for weakness. But strength doesn't need volume. It only needs truth, and the courage to wait for the right door to open. If this story stayed with you, take a second to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep telling stories about people who waited, endured, and rose. Not with noise, but with proof. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes the quietest person in the room is holding the only key.